podcast planning is crucial to having a successful podcast. So here's a tool that will help you out fantastically. From Podcast Movement 2022, I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com, here with Jeff Schechter from Podcast Studio Pro.
Exactly correct.
Now, Jeff, tell me about Podcast Studio Pro that we have here on the screen, but you tell me about it.
Okay, so Podcast Studio Pro kind of came out of the world of professional TV and film writing. Our first product was something called Writers Room Pro, which was for TV writers' rooms. And then we realized that that engine that we built for that would work great for podcasters. So we developed Podcast Studio Pro, which it's not like, it doesn't record, it doesn't publish. It's just a workflow management tool to help people get organized and stay organized when you're doing your podcasts. So instead of, right now it's sort of a dog's breakfast of Google Docs or Evernote or whatever, and people are using dozens of different ones, and everything is kind of fine, but it's not specifically made for the particular pain points that podcasters suffer with. So we're podcasters as well as writers, and we kind of built the app that we wish we had when we started podcasting, which is basically a very simple tool, but it looks simple, but there's a lot of complexity under the hood that enables you to plan out an entire season of your podcast and then drill down episode by episode and then drill down further beat by beat in your podcast. So it kind of keeps you on track, it keeps you organized, it's a better way to create your show notes. You can go right from the cards in Writers Room Pro, Podcast Studio Pro, right to Word document or PDF. So you can share that with your engineering team, or if you're doing it yourself, you have your show notes so some people don't want to have their computer open in front of them. So we try to provide just that mechanism by which people can get organized, stay organized, and have their shows flow more organically without wondering what's coming next.
Okay, so for those who might not be as familiar with the card model, can you just explain that a little bit?
Sure. It's almost like everything that you've seen pretty much since the Dick Van Dyke Show, where here's like the subject and here's some index cards, that explain what you're trying to say, with your giant subject matter. So it would be the equivalent really of if you had a big cork board and you said, oh, okay, I'm going to begin with, here's my talking intro, here's my musical intro, and you say, oh, talking intro, I'm going to say this, my musical intro, I'm going to find some music from Adobe's stock music library, and here's my sponsor message, and here's my first question that I'm going to be approaching. So it's basically you create like a template, and then you add your cards to that template to let you know exactly what it is you're talking about episode by episode. So it's a way to make sure each episode has as much consistency as you want, but also is as unique as you want it to be from one episode to the next.
How does this work for people who are podcasting with a team with multiple co-hosts?
So we have unlimited collaborators, depending on what subscription level you sign up with. But we could certainly have, like, if you and I were both working on the same podcast, and let's say it's your podcast, so you invite me to join your podcast, and now we can both work simultaneously and collaborate in real time. Like, you could be here in Dallas, and I could be back home in LA, and we're both working on the same podcast, and we're working together, and we can see little avatars of each other as we're working on individual cards and how it's working, the whole workflow. We have people who use it where they'll give their editor access, their engineer access, and then they themselves have access, so that everybody's kind of like in sync and on the same page as they're working on their on a particular episode.
Okay, great. So someone who I'm working with could move things around if they think like the episode flows better.
If that's the access that you give them. But some people say, look, I don't want my editor to move stuff around. I just want them to see kind of what the show is shaping up to be, so that when they get into the editing, they have a sort of a blueprint. They knew what I was thinking when I was developing the show. Now they may want to change stuff later in the actual editing, but so that person you give read-only access to, right? And you, let's say I'm producing multiple podcasts, and I want you to be an administrator on those, so you have a higher level of access. So now you can invite people to join that podcast. Or if you're producing multiple podcasts, you have a dashboard where all your podcasts are visible, but whoever's invited to a specific podcast, that's the only podcast they can see. So if you have 10 podcasts, but you only invite me to one of them, I only see one of them. So it's a good tool not just for individual podcasters, but for people who are overseeing a lot of podcasts and have different teams working at it. It's almost like an indispensable tool.
And then how does this work? If I want to take this content that I've prepared, take it somewhere else, like publish it on WordPress or make a PDF or anything like that, what are my options for what to do with the information?
Right, so we have the ability to download the cards in a couple of different ways. You can do it as a snapshot of all the cards, so it kind of looks just like the board, which is fine. That's not my preferred way when I work. I like to download it as a Word document. So that's one of the other options. Download as a Word document, which now I can edit it, or you download it as a PDF if you want to share that so that it's not really editable. And also, you can download it as an HTML file if you wanted to then put your show notes up on WordPress or something like that without just, dropping in your PDF, and they have to download PDF if you want to actually as a native HTML. So you can do that as well. So we have all these different options on how to do it, and also text file. So we have all these different options for how you can get your data off the cards and into some other form that people use however they want to use it.
Okay, so what's the pricing like for this? And keep in mind, after the conference that we're at,
Sure.
what will the pricing be like?
So we have, first off, every subscription has a 2-week free trial, so you can kick the tires, see if it works for you. And then after that, like a single user is $10 a month. 2 users, so like a project owner and a collaborator, is I think $90 a month. And then the prices change. We have like different, then you're buying seats, right? Like tranches of seats. So it'll go from a single user to 2 users, 5 users, 10 users, and then it jumps 10 users at a time. So, and the discounts get greater as you add more seats to it. So by the time you're at 100 users, you're at, I think, $7.50 a user per month.
So this is a great way to prepare your podcast, and this, the thing I see so often is that podcasts that don't go well haven't planned well.
Yes.
And when you plan better, the podcast goes better. So this is a tool that can help people prepare their podcast better.
Right.
And it's designed for podcasters. And that's what I love about this.
We have one podcaster going to something you were just saying, who has literally millions of listens a month, and he says and he loves the app, but he says the biggest problem he has with it is that because now he's so organized, he's hitting everything he wants to talk about. This is no joke. He's hitting everything he wants to talk about. His shows are now running 15 minutes too long, so now he has to edit material out because he's not forgetting anything. So to me, it's kind of a weird thing to say. Yeah, I really love the idea that I screwed up his entire podcasting. Now he's got to figure out how to be more efficient. But that's what we do.
Well, if only we all had that curse of efficiency. But that's what you can get with Podcast Studio Pro. So for Jeff Schechter from Podcast Studio Pro, I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com. Find out the links to this below this video or at theaudacitytopodcast.com/PM22. Thanks for watching.